But one way or another, it seems that in some way, Khufu's determination to build such a massive pyramid displeased his people, and they felt that he'd crossed some sort of a line, maybe reaching too high. One of the most hotly debated topics in ancient Egyptian history is who built the pyramids and how. Ancient Egyptian kings began using pyramids for their burial during the time called the Old Kingdom, which went from about 2600 BCE to about 2100 BCE. The Old Kingdom is considered by historians to be one of three golden ages of ancient Egyptian history, mainly because of the impressive accomplishments that took place during that time. The pyramids, particularly the famous ones at Giza, are considered to be really high on that list of accomplishments. So, who built them, and how did they do it? Although ancient Egypt did use enslaved people for part of their workforce, that was not the people who were used to build the pyramids. The stones were cut, hauled, and put into place by a team of specialists, engineers, architects, stoneworkers, and the rest of the workforce was what was known as corvée labor. Corvée is a French word, but its roots are Latin, corrigare, which means to requisition. Corvée labor means that the workers were doing this job not in exchange for money, but by way of paying their taxes to the king. Instead of giving grain, which is what would normally have been used as money in these times, they were giving their time, expertise, and energy to contribute to building something important for their king. Unlike slavery, corvée labor was always for a set and specific period of time, maybe one season of work on the pyramid, or 2 seasons if you owed a lot of money. The men who worked on the pyramids seem to have taken personal pride in the project, and gave cocky nicknames to their work crews, such as Friends of Khufu or Drunkards of Menkaure. They competed with one another from time to time to see which crew could move the most blocks in a given day, and it seems the winners were likely rewarded with extra beer at the end of the day. The nicknames of their work crews have been graffitied onto many of the blocks that were used to build the pyramids. The conditions under which this corvée labor occurred deserve much deeper analysis than this video has time for. I'll just say that while corvée labor wasn't remotely the same as life of an enslaved person in ancient Egypt, one could make the argument that under an authoritarian ruler, everyone is technically a slave. The first known pyramid to be built in ancient Egypt was built for King Djoser of the 3rd dynasty. The 3rd dynasty was the first one to be considered part of the Old Kingdom, so it began around 2600 BCE. Historians usually credit the design of this first pyramid to the vizier and chief architect of Djoser, whose name was Imhotep. That's right, the guy from the mummy. Yep, he was real. The likely reason that historians have for crediting Imhotep with the invention of the pyramid form is that many generations later, in ancient Egypt, Egyptians would credit Imhotep with all sorts of genius and powers that he very likely in real life did not have. Generations of ancient Egyptians, millennia after Imhotep's lifetime, would worship him as a demigod. Imhotep would be credited with genius as a writer, a doctor, an architect, and many other things as well. However, there is no written evidence to support these claims. It was almost completely unheard of for any artist or architect in ancient Egypt to be credited with the work they did for the king, especially when it came to building the king's monuments. However, Imhotep's name has been found inscribed on the base of a statue of King Djoser and on the outer wall of Djoser's son's funerary complex. Based on those inscriptions, then, it seems that Imhotep did something really impressive for King Djoser. We just don't know for certain exactly what it was. Before Djoser's step pyramid was built, Egyptian kings were buried in underground tombs called mastabas. Mastaba is an Arabic word that means bench. Mastabas were simple rectangular structures built above ground, just on top of a tomb underneath that was fairly straightforward. The above-ground structure was intended for worship of the deceased king. After all, for ancient Egyptians, an important part of their religion was a belief in the afterlife, and for kings, the afterlife included ascending into the heavens to become a star. Even during their lifetimes, ancient Egyptian kings were worshipped as gods by their people. Djoser's tomb originally started as a mastaba, and then He simply added 5 more mastabas in decreasingly smaller sizes right on top of it, creating a step pyramid. But it would be another pharaoh, or more likely his architects, who would finally perfect the creation of the smooth-sided pyramids, or true pyramids, that we see on the Giza Plateau today. Just a few generations later, King Sneferu of the 4th dynasty would be the first one to have a smooth-sided pyramid credited to his reign. It appears that it took his architects 3 attempts to get it right, and their progress is still visible today at the site of Dashur, a royal necropolis on the western bank of the Nile. The first of Sneferu's pyramids is now called the Meidum Pyramid, and it seems as if it collapsed, although some historians argue it was never properly completed at all. We know for certain Sneferu wasn't buried in it. Whether it collapsed in ancient times or simply wasn't completed remains debated. But Sneferu wasn't happy with the results either way, so he tried again. His second attempt would be a fully smooth-sided pyramid that was completed, but it started at a steep angle of 55 degrees and then halfway up changed to an angle of 43 degrees, resulting in a sort of bent look, hence why it's called the Bent Pyramid. Sneferu clearly wasn't entirely happy with that one either, so he went for a third attempt, and this is the one that's known today as the Red Pyramid, a perfectly smooth-sided pyramid, 43-degree angled slope. It's called the Red Pyramid informally because the remaining part that can be seen is all red limestone, but it was originally covered with white casing stones that were removed by later people. It would be Sneferu's son, Khufu, who would be the force behind the building of the Great Pyramid. Though Khufu's own sons, and many kings following him, would also build pyramids to be buried in, none of them would ever rival the engineering genius or sophistication of the Great Pyramid. It was pretty much all downhill from there. Sneferu was likely either the grandson or perhaps great-grandson of King Djoser, and his son Khufu would be the one to build the Great Pyramid. So as you can see, that's a fairly short span of time within the 3,000-year history of ancient Egypt, for pyramids to be invented, reach their pinnacle, and then begin to fall into decline. Stories that were written long after King Khufu's time tell of the extremes he went to achieve building the Great Pyramid, and they're not nice stories. From brutal worker exploitation to accusations of having prostituted his own daughter, the princess, in order to raise funds to complete the pyramid, people in later generations, and we're talking hundreds of years later, have a lot of nasty things to say about King Khufu. It's important to note that these stories do come hundreds of years after Khufu's time, so they should be taken with a big grain of salt. There's no concrete evidence to prove that these accusations are true, but one way or another it seems that in some way, Khufu's determination to build such a massive pyramid displeased his people, and they felt that he'd crossed some sort of a line, maybe reaching too high. To put it simply, it seems that the cost of building the Great Pyramid, whether in terms of resources, money, or human suffering, was simply too much for the ancient Egyptians. If you enjoyed this video and you want to know more about the pyramids, check out my Patreon where you can take in-depth classes with me where we really get into the details of what went on in ancient Egypt, how things were accomplished, and so forth. You can even ask me questions in person. It's fun. Please come along. Hope to see you next time. This is all just a trick. Yeah. Whose name I'm not going to say because it sounds ridiculous. Sakhemket. Awesome. Downhill, whee, down the side of a pyramid. No? Oh, we're done.